Pod SaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by Leader Pro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Pod SaaS. I'm your host, Chris Sheng, and today we've got Anuj from serviceMob. How's it going, Anuj?
Doing great. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. We're not too far away from one another, and I know we both have a close tie to Mucker Capital. I know that they've been investors into you as well, and I work with them as well as they've been an investor into my startup. So I'm happy to have you on.
No, great to be here. And, appreciate it. Always the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing.
Absolutely. So we'll jump right into it. I mean, tell me a little bit about serviceMob and what it is that you guys do, as well as who makes a good customer for you guys.
Yeah, serviceMob is a customer service analytics platform. And I know what maybe people are thinking out there. If you know the industry to some level, maybe you're thinking, wait a second, customer service analytics. I'm sure this is an area where everything is already measured and people have, umpteen options on how they can measure their operation today. The truth is that over time, it's become more and more variegated. There's so many different vendors, so many different technologies that make a modern customer service work. Chris, 10, 15 years ago, you call the 1-800 number. That's the only way you get into a customer service operation. Now you can call, you can, tweet, you can email, SMS, you can WhatsApp, WeChat. There's so many different ways that a consumer and a company can interact. And as a result, those all represent different vendors in the tech stack. So nowadays, for a VP of customer service, it's harder than ever to see that customer support journey. And if you're going to fix that support journey, right, you have to be able to have visibility of it end to end. You have to have the measures in place, just like marketing, right? I think in marketing and sales, clearly things are highly measured, and that's what's really advanced that industry to allow hyper focus of it, maybe marketing a product to a specific person or a demographic. In service, we've been navigating quite blind for quite a while, and it's become harder and harder for those VPs of customer service to put those jigsaw puzzle pieces together and really see that support experience. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what serviceMob does. We help put together that end-to-end support experience for companies and then provide all the measures necessary so that they can get the most out of their data and provide, at the end of the day, the best service for their end customers.
Got it. And is there a particular industry or vertical that you guys have seen the most traction or success with? Is it going to be like enterprise, or is it like direct to consumer goods, or what does it look like?
So we're B2B and B2C. Some folks don't like that we say this, but we're kind of a horizontal SaaS. And hear me out for a second, because sometimes when we talk to investors or we talk to people out there, they don't believe me. They're like, horizontal SaaS, that's a little scary. What that really means is that we do go across most of the industry verticals. And the reason why is because, whether you're calling an airline, a healthcare company, a telecom, the way you get into customer service operationally is very similar, right? You call in to do this, press 1, to do that, press 2, right? You wait on hold for the next available agent, you talk to someone, maybe later on you get a survey or an email follow-up. So, that operationally across industries, you're seeing something that's very standard, right? And therefore, the tech stacks that you might see at a healthcare company or, let's say, an airline are still very similar, right? They're still using Salesforce for CRM or maybe TalkDesk for their telephony system. That said, it lends itself, to the, let's say, the corollary that an analytic solution would then have to be horizontal as well, right? Because you're using a lot of the same technologies horizontally across, any customer service operation, regardless of industry. It lends itself to this idea that analytics can and truly can be successful at being a horizontal solution in the SaaS industry. And that's truly what we are. Today, we already represent a lot of different industries just with the handful of customers, enterprise customers we already have. And so, and really there's not a ton of difference in terms of how that's measured. Why customers contact you is different, but the way they get in is very similar, and that lends itself to a solution in this industry.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, again, I'm interested to kind of get to the founder journey that led to serviceMob. But before we do that, we do this thing called rapid fire questions. It's just basically 10 questions that we fire off. And none of it's too crazy, but if you're ready to jump into it, we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, let's do it. First question is pretty straightforward, but it's the favorite entrepreneur and/or startup story. It can be two separate or one of the same.
It's interesting. One of my favorite entrepreneurs is Amar Bose, right? So, Bose, the sound company, make headphones and speakers, is a professor out of MIT, but I think it's worth a lot of people looking at his story because I think he's very much a pioneer in UX and user design. A lot of audiophiles out there might say maybe it's not the best audio that comes out of Bose versus some other competitors. But where I think he was different was really focusing on not just the sound that comes out of the machine, but how that sound is perceived by, the human itself, right?
Yep.
How is that, manufactured into the ear and perceived as sound? And so there's a lot of UX and user experience research that goes into it that I think could be useful for almost any business. So Amar Bose would be one of my, favorite entrepreneurial stories.
Awesome. That's a good one. Going back to when you're a kid, talking about like 9, 10 years old, do you remember what you wanted to be?
I wanted to be an astronaut. And so I guess like Elon is, and maybe all the billionaires like Jeff Bezos and all these guys are probably, living my dream to some level, obviously more like the NASA side of it. But, my hope is that, at some point in my lifetime, I'll be able to walk on the moon myself or maybe, have a journey up into space. I don't know if that'll make it in my lifetime, but maybe, in future lifetimes, it might be more accessible.
For sure. That's a good one. Next question is a little bit more personal, but it centers around the idea of your most painful experience. And I'll give you some context as to the question. But I think our periods of most exponential periods of growth tend to come from extreme places of discomfort. And so it could be personal or professional, but has there ever been like an experience that was very painful, very difficult to kind of get through in the moment, but obviously in hindsight, you look at now and it was a character defining experience?
Yeah, I think of my time back as an undergrad at UC Berkeley. I mean, I was a math major over there. And it was one of those things where, it's just a different language, different world. I remember, it was very taxing just to kind of learn a new vernacular. You stop seeing numbers after a while in math, which is a weird thing. You start, I think I learned how to write essays more than I learned about numbers, over time, doing like proofs and things like that. But, I think that transition was hard. I think I probably was more geared for, an engineering mindset. I always thought I was pretty good at math until, you meet some of these Berkeley professors that really give you a reality check. And so, but through that time, I think, there's so many interesting skills. I mean, math is one of these places where you set the rules and create universes, and it sets this different mindset of thinking. And I think that put me on a different vector, a different trajectory on how I look at the world, how I think about solutions. And even though that was a taxing time, to try and transition, at the same time, I think it's been highly influential in how I've approached problems over time. And why, not always, but why I do believe, been able to come up with more creative solutions when faced with certain problems.
Awesome. That's a good answer. Obviously, starting a business is difficult. Starting anything from scratch is difficult. So, when your back's against the wall, what's typically motivating or pushing you in that 25th hour?
Oh, wow. I think, being able to hopefully envision the dream, I think, you mentioned we have, a common investor in Mucker, being able to, talk to folks that are kind of a little further ahead, Ted Hong, Ara Medesian from Service Titan have been great mentors. And so kind of seeing where they've taken their businesses over time, how they've struggled, learning from their stories has been a source of motivation. I also think about my employees too, and I always try to, solve for how do we do what's best for a customer? How do we do what's best for our employees and our stakeholders? And so, always reflecting on that, even after a big win or even, a big loss is always a good thing to kind of keep you grounded. So that's what motivates me up in the morning. And, I get up and I think about some of those things, and I'm kind of ready to go to try to say, what's the next step we need to get to that ultimate point of success?
For sure. Next question is, obviously you just mentioned some of these things are taxing and they can be stressful. Is there anything particular that you personally go to decompress?
Other than like Netflix or something like that.
Hey, that works.
I have 2 kids and, they're an handful. I love just, they're 6 and 8 years old, 2 girls. And, when you're around them, it's hard to like, they're so happy, it's just hard to think of other things that, might be pushing you down. So that's my, way of kind of escaping reality for a second, or some of the stresses and pressures that inevitably is going to be in the job, but then, kind of resetting, right? Spending time with family and really just, kind of enjoying life with people you love around you.
Yeah, for sure. Another common, tale of an entrepreneur is like you tend to wear a lot of hats, right? And so even though you might have majored in something, have domain expertise over a certain particular field, you do a lot of different things, especially in the early days. Has there been a skill set that you've picked up along the way as a founder that, you've either loved or hated?
Chasing AP departments, that's sometimes something I hate. But it's a skill, right? I mean, I think that's it. But, I think there is a finer part of negotiation. I think one of the hardest things in the world, Chris, and you can attest to this, is getting people to sign their name on something, a contract, an SOW, whatever have you. But, learning that as an art, right? Really trying to understand. And I think there's certain things, that you have to pay attention to really get that deal through. And I think that's created somewhat of a hypersense in some ways, right? Really, not trying to overread into situations, but trying to really get the cues on where people's problems are, where their pain points are, and then making sure that when we are trying to, go forward with the deal, we're really emphasizing those buyer values to get the deal done. And I think, that's useful in a startup. It's useful in a lot of different ways, right?
For sure.
But that's one of the hardest things to do. And it's something that, I've appreciated as an art over time.
Good answer. Next question, maybe you already alluded to this before, but it's the idea of, one, do you have a bucket list? And then 2, what's one of the more ambitious items on that bucket list? And I know you mentioned going to space, which is pretty ambitious, but outside of that, is there anything else?
Oh, wow. There's so much. I mean, I think, look, I used to be a consultant. I traveled 47 weeks a year. I got to see a lot of, I used to travel a lot, and I got to see a lot of America, a lot of the world. But there's still, I think sometimes we think about what is it that we haven't seen. There's big gaps in my travel itinerary that I would want to get to. I recently just went to Argentina. I was there over New Year's, and then just realized, post-pandemic, how much I really love traveling, experiencing new cultures. Yeah. There's so much of this world I want to see, and my bucket list would be satisfied with kind of an around the world ticket one day, where I could just, keep going to different cities, different places across the world, learning about food and culture, wine. I love it all, right? Those are the kinds of things that, I think about, in terms of what would continue to, things that I could continue to kind of cross off with that bucket list. But Antarctica, that's one I want to get to, because I realized that Argentina, I was closer to Antarctica than I thought. Now I'm kind of like motivated to figure out how to get there. So,
got it. It's a good one. Last question here is the idea of legacy, but more importantly, what kind of impact do you want to leave on this planet before you leave it?
it's a great question. I think part of when you deliberate with a startup in terms of what you want to spend your time, I think, a lot of us, are sitting on the couch, or we're in school, or we're somewhere where we're thinking about different ideas that we can take forward. This is, customer service is one where I happen to have domain expertise, but part of what I was thinking about was exactly this question, right? Is there a way that I can have impact? I think of customer service as something that, whether you're rich or poor, if you're Warren Buffett, you still have to go to wait in line at the DMV. Like, you can't outsource that, right?
Yeah.
You can't have someone, maybe you could pay someone to wait in line for them, but really it's one of those things where it's your picture, it's your ID, it's your account. It's a great equalizer in some ways. And, like I said, it's something that affects everyone. We all have to deal with customer service, whether it's, an airline, a telecom, a government agency, whatever have you. And, my contribution is, if we could use our data, our analytics, our platform to make that a little bit better for everyone, I think the enormity of impact of that is amazing. I think, parents can take that time back and parent more. Doctors can take that time back and doctor more. Athletes can take time back and do more of what they love, instead of waiting on hold for the next available agent, right? Those are the kinds of things I think about. It's not, maybe not the greatest thing in the world, but I think, all we have at the end of the day is time. And if you can give that back to people in some ways, so that they can do the things they love, I think that's always a good thing. And so hopefully Guy, the dream would be, hey, Anuj, that was the guy that fixed the dismal state of customer service. I would love that, even if that was on my tombstone.
Fair enough. Good deal. Awesome. That's it for the rapid fire questions, but a lot of good nuggets in there that I definitely want to dive into now. Specifically, you mentioned your previous career as a consultant. Can you speak a little bit about that experience? Was that kind of the aspirational job when you're going through college and university? And then how did you ultimately then make that decision from a comfortable job with a steady paycheck to then making the leap into entrepreneurship and ultimately becoming a startup founder? And I don't know if ServiceMob was the first startup or if it's a second or third, but maybe speaking to kind of when you first started getting that taste of that just kind of like entrepreneurial, bug that made you need to do it.
Yeah, I when I started at Accenture, it was kind of out of the wake of, I would say that the 2001 kind of recession, post 9/11. I think, 2002 was kind of a rough year. And then 2003, 2004, the economy started coming back. And, in that time, you started seeing companies hire again. But, Accenture and consulting, that was kind of a dream profession. I was kind of the guy, the guy who wanted to do 10 minors instead of one major. Consulting is kind of the professional version of that, right? Like you're working at different companies, you're solving different problems. You could never get too bored because, no project is that long. So you're moving on to, urgent issue to urgent issue. And it's fast paced. There's a lot of travel. So as a young person, that was wonderful. And I love my time there. I think I got to work with, some of the biggest and the best companies in the world, solving important problems to them, seeing what they did really well and seeing what they did not so well, and those are all valuable things. And, at some point later on in my career, I started working with kind of the bigger companies, the bigger emerging companies, really in big tech, right? So your Googles, your Facebooks at the time, at that point, I started to kind of get a little bit of that flavor of the innovation culture and
Mm.
how, big tech was going to disrupt a lot of what we saw in enterprise and probably in our lives as well. The 2010s decade, I look back at it. I mean, it's the era of digitization, right? I mean, to me, that's what happened. You kind of had mobile phones and social media kind of start in the 2000s, but then the digitization era really was in that 2010s time frame. And, I started to see an enormous opportunity in how a lot of these technologies around analytics and social media and IoT, eventually blockchain, how these things could, really disrupt industries and really help advance, the way that customers are served, the way that we
Hmm.
market, the way that we do business. All of those things, had the ability to be disrupted in that time. And so I started catching the bug there. I did my grad school at MIT. I took an opportunity to kind of go out there. And, at MIT, it was almost like game over because you just saw entrepreneurs left and right, people starting companies left and right. You had this unfettered, uninterrupted time probably since 2009 all the way to 2015, when I started grad school. You just saw this time of just unprecedented growth, and that even kind of continued 5, 6, 7 years later, all the way maybe up to until 2022, right? But it's one of those things where the opportunities just were lining up, and you just had so many ideas, and that's where I started to think about, hey, maybe it might be worth going out on my own instead of going back to consulting or going out to another tech job. Certainly those opportunities were there, but it was one of those things where I was like, healthcare is overrated. I'm not getting any younger. If I'm going to try something, this is the time to try it. And, I had a good reign under my belt, at Accenture. I felt like I had a great education, just blessed with good people and great mentors that I've learned a lot from over the years. But I wanted to really take that and build something on my own. And I think that was an enormous opportunity for me. It wasn't easy, right? I think it's so much more comfortable to just stay where you are. Newton's first law of inertia, right? You want to, kind of stay the vector you're in. But, I thought, hey, look, if there's a time in my life where I can do this, I can afford to do it. Maybe it's a bit risky because I started building a family around that. But at the same time, I said, hey, it's not going to get any easier going forward. So
Yeah,
if there's a time, it's now, and you just got to get in the ring and go do it.
absolutely. And so how did you come across the idea for serviceMob? And then, walk us through a little bit more of maybe like the tangible logistics of how do you make the leap, right? Like, was this directly after MIT? Was it during MIT? Was it that inflection point? You finished MIT and is like, do I go back to the workforce, or do I, find the next idea? And what did that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, and you're seeing this transition with a lot of schools, especially business school, where, entrepreneurial education is becoming, more and more prominent. There's so many, great entrepreneurs who have come out of, MIT's ecosystem. A lot of them are contributing back. I had a lot of great lectures, over time with, various founders of very top, tech startups that are now, that have gone on to be super successful, right? And so, part of it is that belief that, wow, that CEO of HubSpot, he was sitting right here in my seat maybe, 6, 7 years ago, and now he's running a publicly traded company, right? That kind of transference, right? Of,
Hmm.
that person was me, 7 years ago. Why can't I be that person, 7, 10 years from now, right? So those are the kinds of things that, when you're seeing that, you're more exposed to it, you kind of think about it more. But even more, I think, business school and a lot of grad school, it's become a platform for a lot of these ideas. And so, there's a lot of things where, serviceMob, it started as a project, at MIT. I was in a class with Bill Olet, who was one of the great, professors out at MIT, great professor of entrepreneurship, but, teaches an awesome class called New Enterprises. And that was like the genesis of it. I got up there, I pitched, and I said, okay, who wants to join me in building the next unicorn? And, I got an awesome team just from that class who were really excited about the idea. We started kind of building, doing the primary market research, thinking about, who's our target market, who's our ideal customer profile, all those things, right? And so, that was kind of the genesis of it. But I think once you kind of finish school, the reality hits you of, is this something you're really going to do? It's easy when the opportunity cost is not huge, right? When the opportunity cost is just taking another class or a different, course. Sure, everybody wants to kind of be in a startup and do entrepreneurship and be part of an exciting idea. Once you're done and now you're staring, 6-figure offers, from big tech companies, from consulting companies, and you have those opportunities right in front of you, that's where what you really want to do, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you can't refuse that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The startup life isn't for everyone, right?
Yeah.
But, you're going to have people who take the deal and go work for Google and Facebook and all those places. And then you're going to have people who truly are going to kind of jump out on their own. And for me, I kind of knew. I knew, right around then that, hey, look, even though these offers are coming in, this is the time for me. My calculations may be very different than others, but, for me, it was kind of a now or never kind of thing. And I kind of, decided on now.
Yeah, makes sense. Did you have like a founding team? Obviously you said you're also starting a family at that time, right? So getting the buy-in from the wife or from, whoever the family side of things is obviously also super important when you're making these types of decisions, right? But yeah, on that kind of like a practical level, were you getting the support system that you felt like you needed in order to make that leap as well? And how important was that? Because I think like obviously it's a lot different than the 19-year-old, right? Like that's dropping out and making that decision. Like they have very little responsibilities and it's minimal. They're not risking a whole lot. But obviously somebody in your case where, built up a stellar career, had a comfortable living with probably pretty sizable income at that point and be able to have to turn all those things down. Can you talk us through what that looked like for you? And
yeah, it was very hard. And I'll tell you, the two or three biggest influences were, one, my wife. Luckily, I'm incredibly lucky that she is from an entrepreneurial family, right? So, she grew up in a way where she saw her parents, her dad, build something from scratch. So in some ways, she saw it, she lived that movie, she understood that story, and she encouraged me to kind of go where I wanted to go, right? And this was something that, I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure, when it's more than just you, as you finally pointed out there, now you have a family, you have, obligations, you're going to need that support. So thank God, she was, she had that experience and she was just like, we got to go for it, So it was definitely a team effort there. But then secondly, it was also my dad, and, I think like Asian parents, like I'm a second generation immigrant. So my dad came from India, and I think he tried to start, a few businesses, but, for the most part, he played his career very safe.
Yeah.
And he's like, I wish I had the opportunity to do what you're even considering right now. And so once he said, thumbs up, go for it, I think that's all I needed to say, you know what, I have the support I need, to at least, from a moral perspective. I did think about, the possibility of this before I went to business school, to think about, how much do I need to save and how much do I need to think about that before I jump into, a world with no income and no healthcare, for a little while, right?
Yeah.
So those were kinds of calculations that I had to make too. So it wasn't just, jumping cold, but yeah, sure, there was some planning involved, but having that moral support is bigger than anything else, right?
Yeah.
And so having the people around you just say thumbs up, yes, like go for your dream. That's I can't say enough about that, because that's what influenced me to move forward.
Yeah, makes sense. Next question here is kind of centered now around, all right, you have the idea, you've done the research while at MIT. I don't know how far the project has gotten now, but from doing that as an in-class project and then to formally, I guess, or legally creating the entity, kind of pulling the different logistical pieces of actually creating a legitimate business. When does that start happening? And walk us through kind of the early days of building out product and then your initial go-to-market motions and trying to get to product market fit as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think, early for me, it was about, I think it's almost like, is this a good idea, right? Like you're questioning yourself, you're looking for validation where you can get it. And, I think when I graduated, one of the first earliest pieces of validation we got was from MIT itself. And, there's a great program director still there right now who runs, an institutional fund, on behalf of MIT. But back then it was just starting. It was called the Sandbox Innovation Fund. And they were like, hey, if you have a good idea, come pitch it. And, we could give you, up to 10K, to go pursue it. And, 10K, it doesn't get you incredibly far, but
Sure.
to me, it was less about that and more about, hey, is this something that can hunt? Do people actually think this is a good idea? I went in front of a room full of, Boston-based, VCs and professors and people in that entrepreneurial community in and around Boston and MIT. And, I gave my best pitch and, they came back and said, hey, yeah, we could throw 10K, behind this. And I was like, wow, okay. It's just that little bit of validation just goes a tremendous amount. And,
Yeah.
I think for us, it was about, post now grad school, and kind of moved back to Southern California. I think part of it was also trying to find the right team. And I think, back then, this is pre, Techstars and all that stuff, who was down here in LA, right? I mean, you had Mucker, you had, Amplify, Paul Burkall, those guys out in Venice. And so, started, really trying to get plugged into the entrepreneurial system here. And I've always found good advice, and some of the best advice just come from other founders. And so being able to, iterate on your idea, being able to, really come up with the right concept, then, being lucky to kind of, get funded by Mucker, and then, start to bring in hires. Those were really exciting times. But by then, we've already had so much to find in our market research and that kind of thing, where it was almost like there's nothing left to do other than let's crank out this product and get out there and see what we can do to, get into anyone who might be willing to take us on as hire us and have them be our customer, right? Find a customer. And that was the big thing, is what can we do to make it so damn easy for someone to just kind of, take us in and give us a shot. And so, that's where the early days were, very quickly, is, building a very lean team, being really focused on the value proposition, But then on top of that, I think really finding that first customer who could help you iterate through the product, right? Iterate through the need that was necessary, and help you redefine where your product needs to be to find that product market fit.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Walk us through kind of like where's the team at now today? How far are you guys, in terms of traction and growth, and where do you see kind of the immediate needs as a company for the next 6 months to a year, especially given the current macroeconomic environment, and then ultimately, where do you see you guys in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think, we're 12 people. Like I said, we're based in Irvine now, so post-pandemic, moved a little bit closer to Orange County, where I've moved since maybe starting out at Mucker. But it's one of those things where, I think we're poised in a good way. I think we didn't move in the way that was just like move fast and furious. And maybe that's right or wrong. I don't know. It's like, I'm not an expert. It's like any more than any other founder is. I'm kind of learning as I go too. But part of what we realized we needed in our space was building a corpus. To build that horizontal SaaS, we needed more and more validation from cross-industry customers, and also more and more validation from the variegated tech stacks. No two companies have the same tech stack. So can we really provide analytics to any company with any tech stack in any industry? We think that that's the company that's going to win in this space, right? But to prove that, we have to build that, corpus of data over time to almost show that and prove it to our customers, our investors over time that are going to continue to back us. And so, it took us, some time to kind of build that corpus out. But, we're at a point where, we're selling, to not just growth stage companies, but we're selling to, Fortune 500 companies, right? So we have, Fortune 500 companies that are now, in our customer base, and we're selling up market. And I think in the era of today, in the context of 2023, where we see, you see the statutory layoffs, right? You're seeing Google laid off 12,000 people, Microsoft laid off people, Twitter, that's another story right there. But you're seeing these layoffs across the industry. That's what happens first, right? And this is back to my experience back, at Accenture, when I saw, in the 2008, 2009 crisis. That's what you see. That's part one of the story. Part two of the story, which hasn't played out yet, is going to be, now you have a lot of companies that have, they've done the layoffs, they've, reduced their burn, but now what they need to do is improve productivity. They need to, continue to drive cost optimization in a smart way instead of a draconian way, right? I think right now it's like, okay, get rid of this department and that department. It's kind of these indiscriminate, like, cuts that are happening just to kind of quickly improve the financials. Over time, you're going to see a movement toward improving productivity and doing smart cost optimization. And that's where I think we're going to play extremely well for our customer base, because that, in customer service, in order to improve it, it's not antithetical to reduce costs and improve customer experience when it comes to service. If it takes you less effort as a customer to solve your issue, that means less operational resources, that means less cost. And generally, customer service is one of the top 3 line items in terms of labor spend in any, larger enterprise company. So with that, I think we're playing to the right themes. It may take, a few months for people to get over the shell shock over, a lot of the layoffs that are happening right now, which are, it's terrible to see. But I do think there's going to be a period of investment over time in those areas of productivity and cost optimization. And, as a result of that, I also think when you do that in our industry in particular, you're also going to get better customer experience as a result as well. And that, should improve top line, and hopefully should improve hiring over time, right? To help us get us back to, where we want to be as an economy.
Absolutely. Awesome. On that note, I think we will wind it down. Any last thoughts that you would like to share to some of our listeners out there where, maybe some of the learnings that you've gone through personally, that you feel like it could be some passing thoughts of wisdom or advice?
Yeah, always bet on yourself. I think, there's a tendency to, doubt, especially in this business. You're not human if you're not having doubts about where you could go and what you can be. Not everything is going to be successful. Not everyone's going to win. That's okay. But bet on yourself. The best investment that you can make is in yourself. And whether it's, this experience or, 3 experiences away or 3 startups away from where you are now, it's going to pay off. Those investments in yourself, whether it's learning something new, whether it's challenging yourself to get to the next level, this is, like you mentioned, Chris, those are the periods where you see the largest personal growth. The worst thing you could do is shy away from it, right? I think, the old man in the arena kind of quote that Teddy Roosevelt, but the idea of the person who's not going to win is not, winners aren't, created on the sidelines. They're not created by people who don't step in and really, show up for the challenge. The ones that do show up, the ones that do kind of come in and fight, that's where you're going to get enormous growth. And it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but it will be accretive to your career someday down the line. So invest in yourself. That's always the number one thing that I would tell anyone in this business.
100% agree. So on that, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. And thank you so much for sharing your personal journey as well as the journey of serviceMob and how you guys ended up today. And much luck on your future success.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate this. This was fun. And, look forward to seeing you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us.